Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The desert sun glared down, baking the sand beneath steel-toed boots. The acrid scent of sweat and fear clung to the air. Zara Vera's chest heaved, her pulse hammering against her ribs as she balanced on the edge of the rooftop. 3 figures, their uniforms patched with black insignias, encircled her. "Kneel before me," the tallest one barked, a sneer curling his lips. Dust swirled around them like a living ghost, catching the glint of his blade. Zara's jaw tightened. She could hear the faint static of radio chatter. 267 Navy SEALs, hidden on a ridge, watching her every move. They didn't know it yet, but this was no ordinary civilian they underestimated. She measured them, heart racing but mind razor-sharp. Memories flickered, years of rigorous Delta Force training, missions where failure was death. Her attackers didn't see the steel beneath her skin. One lunged forward, hand outstretched, ready to seize her. Instinct took over. In a blur, she ducked, pivoted, and used the momentum to throw him over the edge. Sand exploded where he landed, a cloud masking the horror in his eyes. Her second assailant froze, and that hesitation was all she needed. Zara's eyes, dark with intensity, locked on the third. He snarled, raising a baton, but she was already moving. A twist, a strike, and he collapsed to the sand. The echo of his thud was deafening against the silent, wide desert. Her breath came in sharp bursts, but she didn't allow relief. Not yet. She knew the 267 pairs of trained eyes, all watching, all waiting for a sign of weakness. They didn't flinch when the first one fell, they were expecting her to crumble. A bead of sweat ran down her temple, and her muscles ached from the tension, but every fiber of her being screamed focus. She could hear them now, the collective intake of breath from the distant ridge, a subtle wave of shock that rippled through the SEALs as they realized what they were witnessing. This was no ordinary street fight. This was calculated precision, brutal efficiency, and total control. Zara Vera was a force disguised as a target. The wind shifted, carrying the sand like whispers of warning. A faint glint on the horizon suggested reinforcements, and her pulse accelerated again. She knew she had only moments to act before the odds shifted, before the hunters became desperate. One final glance at the horizon, a breath that tasted of grit and resolve, and Zara Vera prepared for the next wave. The desert seemed to hold its breath. "Now they'll learn," she whispered, voice low but filled with command, a challenge to the world, to the 267 eyes watching her silently. She shifted her stance, ready to strike again, each movement a visual poem of lethal grace. Zara Vera's hands trembled, not from fear but from memory. Years before the desert, before this moment, she had been just a girl named Zara in the rain-soaked streets of Valtorta, a small coastal city where shadows clung to every alley. Her mother, a nurse with tired eyes and calloused hands, had taught her early that survival wasn't about strength, it was about timing, observation, and knowing when to strike. Her father's absence left a hollow ache that no lullaby could fill. By 10, Zara had learned to read people like open books, to anticipate violence before it came. The city had been her first battlefield, and every narrow escape had honed the instincts that would one day terrify trained soldiers. At 15, she had been recruited by a clandestine program, a Delta Force feeder initiative disguised as a training camp for exceptional teens. The instructors were merciless, treating weakness like a contagion, punishing hesitation with exhaustion that burned muscles to ash. Zara remembered the first time she had faced a live fire simulation. Sweat stinging her eyes, smoke filling her lungs, and a fellow trainee screaming when he failed to hit the target. Most would have quit. Most would have crumbled. But not her. She had stood, counted the shots, adjusted her breathing, and became the hunter, not the hunted. The memory of Lieutenant Corin, her first mentor, was sharpest. He had a voice like gravel and eyes that never blinked. "You will survive," he had said one night after a grueling run across a frozen ridge. "Not because you're strong, not because you're faster, but because no one can predict what you'll do next." That phrase had burned into her mind. It was a promise and a warning. Every mission after that was a test of her ability to turn chaos into control, pain into precision, doubt into opportunity. Her first combat mission overseas had been in the scorching plains of Arzina. Hostile territory, enemies everywhere, allies lost in smoke and fire. Zara had been underestimated, too young, too slight, too untested. By the end of the week, she had saved 2 squads from ambushes, disarmed mines, and taken a hostage alive, all while under the gaze of superiors who now whispered her name with awe and fear. She learned early that respect was never given. It was seized in the heat of moments that demanded courage, ruthlessness, and heart. Now, on this sun-baked rooftop, with 3 attackers below her and 267 Navy SEALs silently judging her performance from afar, Zara drew from every fragment of those memories. Each moment of loss, every shadow of betrayal, every aching muscle of exhaustion, they fused into a single truth: no one would ever control her. Not the city that had tried to break her, not the instructors who had tested her, and certainly not these men who believed intimidation was their weapon. A faint sound carried from the ridge. She sensed the SEALs, their trained eyes tracking her movements like a predator studying prey. But they weren't here to intervene. They were here to witness. And what they would see next would shatter every expectation they had about who she was. Zara inhaled, tasting grit in the dry air, and centered herself. She knew the next wave of attackers was coming, and this time she wouldn't just defend. She would command. Even in training, Zara had learned that trust was a weapon as sharp as any blade. Her closest ally had been a boy named Rethink, a wiry sharpshooter with a sarcastic grin and eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. They had saved each other countless times during grueling exercises, Rethink covering her back while she neutralized threats, Zara guiding him past traps he couldn't yet see. Together they had been unstoppable. But alliances forged in fire were fragile. One careless word, one fleeting misstep, and the bond could crumble into ashes. Rethink had made that mistake. During a mission in the rain-choked forests of Varentia, a miscommunication left a target alive, and the instructors had called it failure. Zara had watched as he flinched under their wrath, guilt etched into every line of his face. She had wanted to shield him, to tell the instructors it wasn't his fault, but she didn't. Every lesson had taught her that survival demanded decisions, not mercy. That day she had realized that even those closest to you could become liabilities. The memory tightened around her chest like a vice. Back then she had felt betrayal for the first time, a quiet fracture that she never allowed to heal fully. Every person she trusted afterward, teammates, allies, even friends, was weighed against that ghost. Could they be counted on when everything collapsed? Could they survive the fire that now defined her life? In the silence of the desert, with the sand swirling around her boots, that question returned with a vengeance. Her other formative figure had been Commander Sale, a hardened veteran whose calm voice could still the most chaotic battlefield. He had noticed her instinctive precision and whispered, one evening as the campfire crackled, "Zara, remember this, control isn't just about winning fights. It's about owning the fear in others before they realize it exists." She had filed the words away, and now, with attackers below and a watching audience, she understood them in full. Even now, as the SEALs observed from the ridge, their expressions unreadable behind mirrored visors, Zara sensed an invisible tether connecting them to the unfolding fight. They were evaluating, judging, waiting to see if she would falter. It wasn't just her attacker she had to dominate, it was the narrative, the perception of skill, the unspoken challenge to every eye following her every move. The desert wind whipped across the rooftop, carrying with it the faint clatter of weapons being readied. Zara flexed her fingers, feeling the strength in every tendon, every joint honed from years of relentless drills. She remembered the pain, the isolation, the long nights when the only sounds were the wind, the stars, and her own heartbeat. And she remembered the vow she had made to herself that no one, not fear, not doubt, not betrayal, would ever bow her spirit. She glanced once more at her attackers. Their confidence was brittle like cracked glass. She could see it in the set of their shoulders, the way they underestimated her because of size, because of appearance, because of gender. A small smile touched her lips. They had no idea what they had unleashed. Zara's mind shifted between past and present like a slow-motion reel. She remembered the mission that had changed everything, a covert operation in the frozen peaks of Darskaya, where betrayal had come from the most unexpected quarter. Her team had been ambushed, pinned beneath a storm of gunfire, because someone within their ranks had leaked their coordinates. Lives had been lost that day, and the betrayal had stung worse than any wound. Since then, trust had been earned, measured, and tested. Nothing was given freely. It was here years ago that she had begun to perfect the skills she now wielded on the rooftop. Improvisation, reading subtle cues, predicting movements, exploiting hesitation. Every assault, every ambush had been a lesson in the calculus of survival. She had learned that fear was as much a weapon as a gun, and the right display of control could unnerve even the most seasoned soldier. Every opponent she faced now would feel the weight of that silent command. Her attackers, 3 men who believed brute force alone could intimidate, had no idea they were stepping into her meticulously calculated trap. The rooftop was her domain. She had anticipated their approach, mapped the edges, calculated their angles. Every tile, every corner, every gust of wind became part of her strategy. As she crouched low, the sun glinting off her hair and casting long shadows across her face, she felt the rush of adrenaline that only comes when everything depends on your instincts. The distant ridge trembled with the muted presence of 267 Navy SEALs. They were invisible observers, their silence a weight pressing down on her. She could feel their anticipation, their disbelief growing with every second. They were watching not just for her skill, but for the moment she would reveal the truth of her identity, the Delta Force operator hidden beneath the guise of vulnerability. That reveal would shatter their expectations and command their respect in a way words never could. Her attackers shifted, uncertain now. The first man recovered from his tumble and staggered to his knees, rage burning in his eyes. The second hesitated, sensing the momentum slipping from his grasp. Zara's voice, calm yet cutting through the desert wind, broke the tension. "One more step," she said, her tone laced with steel, "and you'll wish you had knelt when I told you to." A flash of panic passed through their eyes, the first true crack in their bravado. Every instinct honed and countless drills screamed at her that this hesitation was her opening. She could strike decisively, neutralizing them before reinforcements arrived, or she could draw them further into her trap, making their failure inevitable. Her body coiled like a predator about to spring. The rooftop, the sand, the wind, they were all instruments in the symphony of control she was about to conduct. Years of preparation, sacrifice, and survival converged in this moment. She was ready. A low whistle of wind carried across the ridge, almost like a warning. Her attackers were about to learn that intimidation could be lethal, and underestimating a storm was a mistake no one lived to repeat. The desert heat pressed against Zara's skin like a living thing. The attackers were moving, boots scraping against the sun-baked tiles, their eyes narrowed with overconfidence. She crouched low, muscles coiled, every sense honed to a razor's edge. The first man lunged again, his blade slicing through the thin air, aimed at her side. Time slowed. Years of training whispered in her mind, anticipate, redirect, neutralize. She stepped to the side, the blade missing by inches, and grabbed his wrist in a sudden twist that sent him sprawling over the edge once more. The second attacker advanced, baton raised, a grimace of certainty on his face. Zara met him head-on, spinning in a tight circle that slammed her elbow into his ribs. The impact echoed across the rooftop. Dust rose from their movements, swirling in golden clouds around her. Each strike, each dodge, each pivot was a calculated motion, a silent declaration that she was not to be trifled with. Above, the 267 Navy SEALs shifted on the ridge, the subtle click of scopes adjusting, eyes tracking every motion. Their disbelief was palpable. This was not a woman to fear, not a target to intimidate. She was an instrument of lethal precision, moving with fluidity that made her opponents seem clumsy in comparison. One by one her attackers faltered, confusion and panic overtaking brute force. The first man struggled to rise, glaring at her with rage and disbelief. Zara's voice cut through the wind, low and commanding, "Kneel. Now." It was not a request. It was a decree. And for the first time he hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his eyes. In that moment she saw the opening. A swift kick to his chest sent him sprawling backward, the sand beneath him erupting into clouds of red-gold dust. The third man was the largest, the most confident, and now the most dangerous. He circled her, swinging wildly, each strike fueled by desperation. But Zara anticipated, predicted, countered. She ducked under a wild swing, rolled forward, and came up behind him, twisting his arm into a lock that forced him to the ground. Every movement was precise, fluid, and devastating. The rooftop became a stage, dust and sweat and raw determination painting a scene of controlled chaos. The distant SEALs held their breath, some leaning forward, others exchanging glances of astonishment. They had expected struggle. They had expected hesitation. What they did not expect was perfection, raw and undeniable. For a heartbeat, the desert fell silent. Only the wind carried the weight of what had happened. 3 attackers, all incapacitated, and one woman standing tall amid the chaos, her chest heaving, eyes ablaze with unspoken warning. She wasn't just defending herself, she was issuing a message. Every movement, every glare, every controlled breath screamed a truth that resonated far beyond the rooftop. Underestimating her was the gravest mistake of their lives. Then came the faintest rustle, the shift in the sand beyond the rooftop edge. Zara's eyes narrowed, sensing the next threat approaching. The fight was far from over. The sand whipped across Zara's face as she scanned the edge of the rooftop. Movement flickered, a shadow barely perceptible but enough to trigger her instincts. The attackers weren't acting alone. Reinforcements were coming, and this time they weren't small in number. Her heartbeat quickened, but there was no fear, only calculation. Years of missions taught her that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Each breath, each pivot, each strike had to be precise, deliberate, lethal. The largest attacker struggled to rise from the sand, his pride burned more fiercely than his body. Zara's eyes locked on him. "Enough games," she whispered under her breath, her voice barely carried by the wind, yet heavy with authority. In an instant she closed the distance, a blur of motion. A kick to the side sent him crashing back, but she didn't stop. Her elbow struck with the rhythm of experience, her hands a whirlwind of control. Every SEAL observing from the ridge understood now, she wasn't just skilled. She was artistry in motion, a storm that bent the battlefield to her will. Behind her, the faint crunch of sand signaled the arrival of more adversaries. 4 men larger, armed with knives and sticks, emerged from the side alley. Their eyes gleamed with arrogance. They believed numbers would overwhelm her. But Zara's mind raced faster than they could move. She calculated angles, distances, and momentum, predicting each step before it happened. The first charged. She sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and used his forward motion to hurl him into the wall. Dust exploded around him, eyes wide with shock. The second lunged from the other side. Zara spun, catching his wrist, twisting, forcing him to crash into his companion. A chain reaction of stunned men unfolded as she moved like water, flowing through gaps, striking, neutralizing, and never once hesitating. Her chest heaved, sweat stinging her eyes, but the thrill of control, of dominance over chaos, fueled her. In that moment, her mind flashed to the betrayal of her past. The ambush in Darskaya, the teammate who had faltered, the friends lost because someone had misjudged loyalty. The memory fueled her precision, sharpened her focus. Each strike was both survival and reckoning, a testament to every hardship she had endured. From the ridge, the SEAL's whispers became audible only in her mind. They weren't cheering. They weren't commanding. They were stunned. Every seasoned operator among them recognized the rare, almost mythical precision of her movements. They had trained for situations like this, but nothing could have prepared them for Zara Vera. The final attacker approached, the largest of the new wave, hesitating as he realized his companions were already incapacitated. Zara's eyes met his, a silent warning that froze him in place. Time slowed. Dust hung in the air like suspended glass, sunlight catching the sweat and grit on her face. In that moment, everything she had learned, every ounce of skill and memory of pain, funneled into one precise choice. She moved forward, a calculated strike, and the man crumpled, defeated before he fully understood what had happened. The rooftop fell silent again, save for the wind, and the distant collective gasp of 267 Navy SEALs. Zara stood alone, chest heaving, eyes blazing, not just victorious but commanding. She wasn't just a fighter. She was a force. The wind had shifted, carrying the metallic scent of weapons and the faint hum of tension from below. Zara's eyes scanned the rooftop, muscles coiled like springs, mind racing faster than the desert sun could burn. She had neutralized the initial attackers, yet she knew the true test was still ahead. The final adversary wasn't just strong. He was cunning, trained, and aware that brute force alone wouldn't suffice. That a shadow detached itself from the alley below. He was taller, broader, and carried the aura of authority. His eyes gleamed with calculated malice, and the faint scar along his jaw suggested a history of violence. This was no ordinary combatant. This was the orchestrator, the one who had coordinated the attack from the shadows. For the first time that day, Zara felt the twinge of anticipation mixed with adrenaline. Her pulse didn't quicken from fear, it quickened from the thrill of confrontation. He raised his voice, commanding the remnants of his men, "Finish her. Show her the cost of defiance." The words barely carried across the sand, but they were enough. Zara tensed, coiling like a spring. Every fiber of her being screamed readiness. Years of missions, betrayals, and battles had led her to this precise moment. This rooftop wasn't just a battlefield, it was the proving ground for every lesson she had ever learned. The first strike came fast. He lunged, his momentum brutal, a calculated combination of force and deception. Zara pivoted, redirecting his energy, letting him crash past her and slam into the ground with a thud that shook the tiles. Sand erupted around him like a miniature storm, glinting in the sun. But he was quick to recover, rolling to his feet with a predator's grace, eyes locked on hers with unflinching determination. The rooftop became a blur of motion. Zara attacked with precision strikes, counters and feints honed from years in Delta Force. Every move she made was mirrored in her opponent's response, the rhythm of combat like a deadly dance. Her breath came in controlled bursts, sweat stinging her eyes, heart pounding in sync with every footfall and impact. She could feel the 267 Navy SEALs on the ridge, silent observers, witnessing the impossible. A lone woman challenging a trained commander and prevailing through skill, instinct, and unyielding will. A brief pause hung in the air, dust swirling like a ghost between them. Zara's mind raced, calculating angles, anticipating weakness. She remembered her mentor's words, control the fear in others before they realize it exists. Her opponent's jaw tightened, eyes flickering with the first sign of doubt. This was the opening she had been waiting for. With a sudden burst of speed, she struck, a perfectly timed maneuver that forced him to the edge. The balance shifted. The rooftop trembled with the echo of confrontation, but Zara remained a pillar of controlled power. One final motion, one decisive action, and he faltered, recognizing the inevitability of defeat. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Silence fell, broken only by Zara's measured breaths and the faint sound of distant observers, stunned into quiet awe. She hadn't just survived, she had dominated, transformed fear into authority, chaos into order. And then, above the wind, she whispered with finality, her voice low but carrying across the sand, "Kneel. Or be left behind." The desert sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the rooftop. The wind had settled, leaving only the faint hiss of sand against stone and the rapid beat of Zara's heart. Her chest heaved, sweat and grit streaking her skin, but her stance remained unyielding, ready for anything, yet aware that the immediate danger had passed. The three fallen attackers lay sprawled, defeated, their arrogance shattered. Yet it wasn't triumph that coursed through her veins, it was the weight of every choice, every betrayal, every ounce of survival she had carried for years. From the ridge, the 267 Navy SEALs were no longer mere observers. Their presence was tangible now, eyes wide, chests tight with astonishment. They whispered in quiet disbelief, scanning her movements again and again, as if confirming what they had just witnessed. She had done more than survive. She had executed precision, strategy, and dominance in a way that defied expectation. Even their trained minds struggled to comprehend the full scope of her skill. Some lowered their scopes, shaking their heads. Others exchanged silent nods, respect carved from shock. Zara's thoughts drifted briefly to the past. Rethink, her mentor Corin, the countless missions, the ambushes and betrayals that had forged her. Every loss, every hardship, every sleepless night of practice had culminated here, on this sun-baked rooftop. The attackers had assumed weakness. They had assumed she could be intimidated. And now they lay beneath the weight of their own misjudgment, powerless, their pride fractured. A sudden movement caught her eye, one of the fallen men attempting to rise. Zara's glare was enough to freeze him in place. She didn't need to act. Control wasn't always about action. Sometimes it was a statement, a demonstration of presence that rendered fear automatic. They had learned too late that she was more than a fighter. She was a force that bent expectation to will, a storm that left devastation in its wake. The SEALs began moving down the ridge, approaching cautiously. Each step carried awe and a silent acknowledgement. She had passed a test that few could even conceptualize. As they drew near, one of the senior operators, a veteran with grizzled features and a measured gait, finally spoke. You're the real deal," he said, voice rough, low, almost reverent. "No one in the field moves like that. No one survives like that. Not even half of us could have done what you just did." Zara exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave her shoulders. She had expected recognition, yes, but not the weight of respect in that way. It wasn't about ego, it was validation. Every mission, every betrayal, every ounce of preparation had not been for nothing. The desert seemed to hum with the remnants of her power. Dust settled over the fallen men, over the silent, awestruck SEALs. She allowed herself a moment, a heartbeat, to savor clarity, control, and triumph. And yet, beneath it all, a pulse of caution remained. This fight had been won, but the war for dominance, trust, and survival was never truly over. For now, though, she was unmatched, untouchable, a solitary figure standing tall amid chaos. The wind whispered her name, or maybe it was just the echo of what she had become. The desert air hung heavy with tension, every grain of sand reflecting the golden glare of the setting sun. Zara's chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, eyes scanning the horizon as shadows shifted with the fading light. The rooftop, now littered with incapacitated attackers, felt like the stage for the final act. Yet even as exhaustion gnawed at her muscles, a cold certainty settled in her spine. The ultimate challenge had not yet arrived. From the alley below, a new figure emerged. Taller, broader, and exuding a lethal calm, he carried himself with the poise of someone who had studied defeat and never accepted it. He was the architect of the day's assault, the man who had orchestrated the ambush with precision and arrogance. His eyes locked on Zara's, and for the first time, he registered a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. But it was fleeting. Years of training, betrayal, and relentless missions had forged her into an unbreakable presence. Without a word, he lunged, a blur of movement, strength, and lethal intent. Zara met him instantly, instinct overriding thought. Every strike, every parry, every pivot was executed with perfect rhythm, her body flowing like water over rock. The collision of skill and force reverberated across the rooftop, each impact echoing the lessons of countless missions, betrayals, and relentless drills. Dust and sweat hung in the air like a tangible fog, the intensity amplified by the silent observation of 267 Navy SEALs on the ridge. Her opponent pressed harder, attempting to overwhelm with raw power, but Zara anticipated every move. She used his momentum against him, twisting, redirecting, exploiting hesitation. Each strike she delivered was both a message and a calculation. Underestimating her would cost more than pride, it would cost everything. He faltered, his confidence cracking under the weight of her precision and unyielding control. A heartbeat passed, then another. Time slowed as Zara centered herself, channeling every fragment of her past. Rennick's missteps, Corin's wisdom, the betrayal in Darskaya, the endless nights of pain and preparation. Each memory was a weapon, each scar a reminder that she could endure anything. And now she would finish this. With a final, decisive motion, she struck. He staggered back, eyes wide with disbelief, recognizing the inevitability of defeat too late. The rooftop fell silent except for the soft hiss of wind over sand. Her chest rose and fell, sweat stinging her eyes, but her expression remained calm, commanding, resolute. The threat had ended. From the ridge, the SEALs finally exhaled. Murmurs of awe and disbelief swept through the group. They had witnessed the impossible. A single woman standing unbroken, unflinching, and utterly in control of a deadly battlefield. Respect radiated from them, not just for her skill but for her unshakable presence, the embodiment of what it meant to survive and dominate under every imaginable pressure. Zara stepped back, scanning the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly before her, but she felt a clarity she had never known. The battle was over. The challenge had been met. And in that moment, amid dust, shadows, and silence, she understood something profound. She had not just survived. She had transformed every hardship, every betrayal, every ounce of pain into power, respect, and unbreakable command. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in twilight. And Zara Vera, undefeated, unyielding, stood alone, the master of her own fate. The desert twilight softened the harshness of the rooftop, casting long shadows over the fallen attackers. Zara Vera stood tall, chest heaving, every muscle singing with exertion, yet her stance radiated absolute control. The air was quiet now, save for the whisper of wind through sand and the distant hum of the SEALs approaching. She allowed herself a small, controlled exhale, knowing the storm had passed, but the victory was more than physical. It was the culmination of years of endurance, betrayal, and relentless self-discipline. The 267 Navy SEALs reached the rooftop, eyes wide and respect etched into their faces. They approached cautiously, not out of fear, but in acknowledgement of the impossible feat they had just witnessed. The senior operator, grizzled and stoic, finally stepped forward. His voice carried weight as he spoke. "Zara, you've redefined what we thought was possible. Not just skill, not just training, but everything you are. You've earned every ounce of respect this team can give." Her lips curved slightly, a rare, genuine smile breaking through the desert grit. She nodded, letting the recognition wash over her. It wasn't arrogance. It was affirmation. Every betrayal, every painful memory, every mission that tested her limits had led to this moment of undeniable mastery. The SEALs, once silent observers, now understood the truth. Underestimating her had been a fatal mistake, and her performance had rewritten the rules of what one person could achieve. As the team secured the rooftop and assessed the incapacitated attackers, Zara's mind reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The streets of Valtora, the harsh Delta Force training, the betrayals, the relentless pursuit of excellence. Every hardship had been a brick in the foundation of her unshakable resolve. Now, with danger behind her and recognition at hand, she felt something rare: closure. Yet she didn't linger in triumph. Zara's eyes scanned the horizon, aware that life in the field was never truly predictable. But for the first time she felt the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she had faced overwhelming odds and emerged not just victorious, but in total command of herself, her skills, and her destiny. The senior operator stepped closer, handing her a small device, a tracker confirming the neutralization of all remaining threats in the area. "Command will be reviewing this," he said, a hint of awe in his tone. "They'll want you on every future operation. You're exceptional." Zara took the device, eyes calm, voice steady. "I don't seek recognition," she said. "I seek results. Protection. Control. That's what matters. The rest follows naturally." As the SEALs descended the ridge, leaving her alone with the setting sun, Zara allowed herself a moment to absorb the stillness. The desert stretched endlessly, a silent witness to her victory. She had not only survived, they had learned what it meant to confront a storm they could neither predict nor control. And in that moment, Zara Vera, Delta Force operator, lone warrior, and unyielding force, knew with absolute certainty she had transcended fear, redefined power, and claimed the respect and mastery she had earned through fire, sweat, and unbreakable resolve. The wind whispered through the sand one last time, a final exhale across the desert. And she remained unshaken, untouchable, victorious.